Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to MariosHistoryTalks. It is great to see your bright and shining faces once more. And did you really think I'd leave you hanging there? Come on. So, we have a lot to get to today, but do want to thank you first for your warm welcome back. We're absolutely crushing it across all of our social media accounts. So, do check us out there if you haven't already. And as for today's episode, I took some time to kind of carefully curate through your comment section and feedback to gain a general sense from you all on what you would like to see or what you have criticisms on. One thing I have noticed is that some Macedonians, particularly those in Macedonia, are still a little bit iffy around the ancient Macedonian issue. While the majority of us still affirm that we are neither Greek nor Bulgarians and do have a unique history of our own, some of us, don't want to go as far as to lay claim to ancient Macedonia as part of our heritage. I mean, after all, wasn't it just rammed down everybody's throats by Grigorovich as part of the Antiquization project? Didn't we simply not care about it before? And the only people that did seem to be those crazy, chest-thumping diaspora nationalists like MariosHistoryTalks. So, if this is you, I still love you. But please take a moment now to write a letter to the Greek and Bulgarian foreign ministries to congratulate them on running such effective propaganda campaigns against Macedonia. Seriously. Now, if you're at all open to being challenged on your views, I suggest you stick around so we can discuss why you should still care about those crazy ancient Macedonians and what they mean to us. So, before we get started, definitely take a moment now to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Make sure you have those post notifications turned on. And without any further ado, let's get started. So, before we dive in, I do want to draw some distinctions here. Most Macedonians don't claim direct, unbroken continuity with the ancient Macedonians. If anything, they kind of view it as just simply another layer to an already diverse heritage. Not the end-all, be-all to our identity, but still a part of it nonetheless. Now, some of you will take offense with this and want to claim direct, linear continuity with the ancient Macedonians. I'm personally not of this school of thought, and we can discuss these two theories more in the future, but we can at least agree that certain cultural practices, traditions, archaeological findings, and even genetic testing points to at least partial descent from the Paleo-Balkan tribes of the pre-Slavic era, including the ancient Macedonians. So, with all this in mind, why should we be so bent out of shape over this if it's just one part of a multi-layered heritage? Don't we have other problems we need to worry about? Well, yes, but actually no. Let's start from the beginning here. If we look at the National Revival period, roughly speaking starting in the early to mid-1800s, we see the first inklings of Macedonians trying to place themselves on the map as a people with a history, identity, and more importantly, their own interests. One of the challenges faced in that assertion was the competing claims on their heritage from their neighbors. Quick recap here. Greeks this time period saw Macedonians as descendants of the ancient Macedonians and therefore a Hellenic people, but ones who had lost their original language. Bulgarians, they viewed them as Bulgarians, and they harked back to the Bulgarian empires, especially the Tsar Samuil era, to prove their claim. Serbians, while they would arrive very late to the game, they claimed that Macedonians, unlike the Bulgarians, they were purely Slavs, and therefore had to have been an extension of a larger Serbian family. So with all these competing ideologies, how did the early Macedonian intellectuals and revivalists respond? They chose to reject all that and actually emphasize the glorious ancient Macedonian past to differentiate themselves and their interests. And by concentrating on an ancient Macedonian heritage, they found a way to fuse their pan-Slavicism and local patriotism to actually defend themselves against both Greek and Bulgarian competing nationalisms. Let's take a look at this. So we all, of course, know about Dimitar and Konstantin Miladinov, one of the first great revivalists. And despite being natives of Struga in the wider Ohrid area, and their anthology of Bulgarian folk songs, yes, we know that's the name, they neglected to associate with the legacy of Tsar Samuil, who by then in the history had largely been viewed as an emperor of the Bulgarian kingdom. But instead, they looked to Alexander the Great, as well as Justinian I, Saint Clement and Saint Naum, and King Marco to inspire their local patriotism. Despite literally being in their backyards, they did not think to link their identity with the legacy of Samuel, much less the famed Krum or Simeon of the Bulgarian empires. While all three of these leaders historically fought and defeated Greek forces, Krum in particular being an especially feared historic enemy of the Byzantine Greeks, they were not their heroes in the fight against Hellenism. Philip and Alexander were. And this seems to have been a prevailing national sentiment during this time period. Here's what the traveling Russian Slavicist Grigorovich had to say, who was actually in correspondence with the Mildinov brothers. He noted, "In every place that I have seen, I have heard of no other names than those of Alexander the Great and King Marco. He and the latter live in the memory of the people, and quite general imagery. Memory of Alexander the Great is more ingrained with the people, though often those who apply his name would not otherwise be able to describe his face, and thus call upon teachers who did have those books." In fact, this period was ripe with Macedonians associating with the glory of ancient Macedonia to build upon their movement against Hellenism and the Ottoman yoke. An anonymous Macedonian writer in the popular Tsarigradski Vestnik from 1860 had this to say. He said, "These are the same men who in olden times comprised the phalanxes of Alexander of Macedon." And then, of course, we have Grigor Perlichev. And we have Perlichev's speech on the occasion of the 1000th anniversary of the death of St. Methodius, where to motivate the crowd, he reminded them how shameful it was, Macedonia being this lowly state, when its people had literally once conquered the world. He said, "Mother Macedonia is very weak. Since giving birth to the great Alexander and giving birth to St. Cyril and Methodius, Mother Macedonia has been lying on her bed terribly exhausted. But a mother who gave birth to such sons will give birth to others like them in the future and produce many more Kirillovtsi and Metodievtsi who will become beacons of our schools and pillars of our faith and who will celebrate that Macedonian name." Is it not a great shame for the Macedonians who once conquered the world through their great Alexander and who baptized millions of Slavs through St. Cyril and Methodius and enlightening them, that today we should be the lowest of the whole world in enlightenment? So again, we see that this generation of Macedonians trying to nominally, culturally, and politically start to separate their interests of their people and country from those of the surrounding Balkan nations. And by attaching a Slavic character to the Macedonian kings, however historically dubious this may have been, they were nonetheless drawing a definitive line in the sand against the Greek views on the Macedonians and their claim that the Macedonian liberation was inspired by them or that had been an extension of Greek nationalism. And by linking up with the ancient Macedonian state, the Macedonians also provided a bulwark against Serbian and Bulgarian propaganda, who were also motivated to show a common origin by focusing through their respective medieval empires, not ancient. Again, however accurate their view of the Slavic character of ancient Macedonia was, that's not the point of this conversation. What is the point is to show that why they were doing it in the first place and what the strategic implications of this actually were. And we know it grew to the degree that the Bulgarian writer and politician Petko Slaveykov, he saw it as a threat to the Bulgarian identity in Macedonia. In his letter to the Bulgarian exarch Joseph, he states the following: "We have many times heard from the Macedonists that they're not Bulgarians, but Macedonians, descendants of the ancient Macedonians. As well as, we have set ourselves apart from the Greeks, we being Macedonians. Should we now become subjected to others?" Referring to Bulgarians here. Either way, it shows a strong commitment of the Macedonians in creating a separate state and in distinguishing their interests as separate national and state interests from their neighbors. It aimed to represent their movement as not only autonomous, but also autochthonous, native. And in the face of Ottoman brutality, the glorious military victories and conquering nature of the ancient Macedonians, this radiated especially as a symbol of hope, dignity, and freedom to the Macedonians, all based around the idea of restoring an ancient Macedonian state to its former glory. And this buildup finally took expression with the famed Kresna uprising of 1878, headed by the famous Dimitar Popirgiev-Berovsky. Video down below if you need a refresher. Now, the Kresna uprising was unique in the fact that it was the first uprising that contained the expressions for the creation of an independent or autonomous Macedonia, And it too identified its revolutionaries as the successors to the armies of Alexander of Macedon, who were also fighting for freedom. And we see this especially within the preamble of its constitution. Now, of course, Bulgarians will be quick to say that this constitution is a modern-day forgery like everything else they don't like, but let's take a step back and better understand the spirit of the revolution and its aftermath. As you may know, famous Macedonian revolutionary and writer Georgi Pulevski was actually a signatory to the Kresna Constitution. And after the failure of Kresna, he wrote the well-known 1878 poem Makedonska I in an attempt to re-inspire the broken-hearted Macedonians back to action. In it, he once again made direct reference to the inheritance Macedonians have from ancient Macedonians to make sure they follow through on their pledge from antiquity to continue their Macedonian heroism. He said, "Have you heard, Macedonians? The elders are saying, there were no braver men than Macedonians. 300 years before Christ, Emperor Alexander of Macedonians, with Macedonians, conquered the world. Our King Philip, a Slav he was, Emperor Alexander a Slav. Our Slav grandmothers gave birth to them." So again, signatory to the Kresna Constitution, making the same connections, using the same imagery to drive that definition and give justification to the Macedonian Revolution. The influence of ancient Macedonia during this time period simply cannot be downplayed. But of course, with the failure of Kresna and the non-implementation of Article 23 of the Berlin Treaty, which was to give Macedonia autonomy, Macedonians convened in a national assembly in 1880, which resulted in the formation of a provisional government to pursue autonomy for Macedonia through the legal means. Per this new strategy, if autonomy was still not achieved through the legal channels, I quote here, "The provisional government of Macedonia will call the Macedonian people to arms with the slogan, 'Macedonia to the Macedonians, to rise up ancient Macedonia.'" Now, as a part of the decisions of the National Assembly of Macedonia, a manifesto was drafted by the provisional government, the executive arm of the assembly, that was sent to the diplomatic representatives throughout Europe. And a copy of one of those very original manifestos is today found in the Moscow State Archives, where it was sent as well. It reads, "Macedonians, our dear fatherland Macedonia was once one of the most glorious of countries. The Macedonian nation established the foundations of the art of war. With their victorious phalanx and Aristotle's enlightenment, they civilized humanity in all of Asia. And now our fatherland, so glorious in the past, is on the verge of destruction, thanks to our mistakes and carelessness." Interesting observation. Let's revisit the whole text at the end of the video. Moving right along here in the interest of time, we come across the MRO and the Ilinden period. Again, lots of examples there. We have the actual co-founder of the original MRO, Petar Popovski, stating the following in 1894. He says, "Earlier, the gold of our kinsman, was used to divide the Athenian intelligentsia and bribe them, and he enslaved Greece. And now another time has come with completely opposite conditions, a brother selling out his own brother." Again, once again seeing Philip of Macedonia as that hero against Hellenism. Besides that, we've already covered Kadev's 1903 art interview for the Greek newspaper Acropolis, where he spells it out like it is. "I am a direct descendant to Alexander of Macedon." Can't get much clearer than that. But we also have the controversial figure Anastas Jankov. While he was a supremacist and often clashed with the MRO on how to actually achieve liberation from Macedonia, the grizzled war veteran called the Macedonian Garibaldi, he was still nonetheless a staunch proponent of the distinctiveness of the Macedonians and their ancient heritage. In 1902, as preparation for an uprising in the Kostur region, he issued the following statement to the local Macedonian villagers. He said, "Macedonians, remember the world victory, the world glory of Macedonia, the great Alexander of Macedon. Remember the brave Emperor Samuel, the great man of Macedonia, the magnificent King Marco, the glory of all Slavs. Macedonian blood runs through their veins. They're now looking at us from the heavens and blessing what we have begun. Let's prove to ourselves as their descendants worthy of them. Let's make sure their names are glorious. And let's amaze the world with our bravery, abilities, and self-sacrifice. Let's shake off the shameful yoke that has been suffocating us for 5 centuries." And of course, we do have many more examples of the same honoring of ancient heritage, even after the failure of Ilinden, especially to re-inspire the Macedonians back to the fight and to live up to their name. The 1903 poem Ver by Petar Zogarov is one such example. He writes, "There by Pindos and Shar, by Struma and Vardar, where wounds deep cover all things, the worthy descendants of great Alexander heroically fight tyrants for centuries." And clearly, these Ilindensi didn't really give up on who their national heroes were even after the Ilinden uprising. Here's the cover of the 1923 calendar from, wait for it, the Ilinden organization in Sofia. The same organization composed of former MRO members, as well as Ilinden veterans, who also guarded Gozdadovcev's remains until 1946 when they're transferred to Macedonia. On it, you can see the title, Macedonia and Her Great Sons. Just below that, it says King Alexander of Macedonians. And very faintly on the bottom there, you can make out the words, "You can't extinguish that which is inextinguishable." You can't extinguish that which is inextinguishable. So, what is our takeaway from all this? Well, first, the idea that associating with and much less honoring ancient Macedonia as our identity is something that was just shoved down everyone's throats since the 90s, that's malicious propaganda, imposed by both internal and external enemies to Macedonia. Two things can be true at the same time here. Parts of Skopje 2014 and Grigorovich-era rhetoric arguably went way too far in asserting that identity. Macedonian prayer ring a bell to anyone? But at the same time, this doesn't mean it was something unnatural and forced on us, that it was not part of our history before that. It was important enough for the Miladinovs. It was important enough for Prlichev, for Pulevski, for Berovski, for Karev, for Chupovski, for the Ilindensi, so many more names there. So why are you the sudden exception now that doesn't care? Does moderating your views and your position appease both sides? Does that really get you any closer to the truth here? Or are you in fact just running from an inferiority complex more than anything? Well, if you are, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to. At the end of the day, all national identities were built in part based on some type of myth, and that's okay. This doesn't mean it's all myth. Objective facts still matter. So even if our ancestors attached a purely Slavic character to ancient Macedonia, that doesn't mean they were wrong to associate with them in the first place, or the idea that they mattered to them. Whichever way you look at it, the way Macedonians define their national identity is no different than any other people who carved out their heritage in a period of natural formation. Remember, the conditions under which Macedonia is pressed to give up its claims to an ancient heritage would immediately disqualify most modern accepted nations from any link to their organic identity. I mean, what are we going to start saying here? Hey, Frenchies, look, your name is from a Germanic tribe, your language is Latin, but your ancestry is Gaulish? What gives? And then we have the Egyptians. Egyptians? You mean Egyptian Arabs from Arabia? What do they have in common with the famous ancient Egyptians and the pyramid builders? And of course, let's not forget our wonderful neighbor to the east who relentlessly tries to mock us for honoring a small ancient pagan people who didn't speak our language and nor did they worship our God, while they turn around and they celebrate a small pagan people who did not speak their language nor worship their God and actually persecuted them in the past. Absolutely incredible. But if you still have reservations about all this, let me finish reading the Macedonian Manifesto for you. Foreign and suspicious nations want to conquer our homeland and destroy our nation, which, shining with such light, will never be destroyed. Our mother Macedonia became now as a widow, lonely and deserted by her sons. She does not fly the banner of the victorious Macedonian army. Today, she is just a geographic term, much like if someone's trying to hide her victorious nature with the veil of oblivion. Conspirators have dug her grave and roamed throughout our land, injecting poisons in her. These conspirators are the undertakers of our glorious and great fatherland. They want to dismember it and lay it as a prayer in front of their victorious armies of Austria-Hungary. If one joke is replaced with another, the revival of Macedonia will become impossible, and our nation will be eradicated. This moment is of utmost importance for Macedonia. It is a question of life or death. Real Macedonians, faithful offsprings of your fatherland, will you let your fatherland be destroyed? Look at her. She is suffocated in slavery, bleeding from the wounds that the surrounding nations inflicted with her. Look at the heavy chains the Sultan has put her in such a helpless state. all in tears. Our dear Macedonia, our beloved fatherland is calling to you. My faithful children, you descendants of Aristotle and Alexander the Great, you in whose veins flow Macedonian blood, don't leave me to die. Help me. It would be a great shame for you, true Macedonians, if you remain silent witnesses of my burial. No, no. Here are my awful bloody wounds. Here are my heavy chains. Break them. Heal my wounds. Do whatever is in your power, so the words Allied and United Macedonia can be written on the banner that I will raise. When you succeed victoriously, drive away the killer from this land, who fly the banner of discord and sow perilous ideas, dividing you, my children, into countless nations. And so, united under the banner of Macedonia, as one nation, rise that glorious banner up high and prepare to write single-mindedly on it, long live the Macedonian nation, long live Macedonia. This is the voice of our country. This is our freedom, our national inheritance. If you proclaim these words, you will be greeted by the free-thinking nations and all graceful hearts will hurry up to join you and fight with you, to help you gain the holy freedom that has been taken away from us for so many centuries. Macedonians, remember your ancestry and don't give up on it. Remember your ancestry and don't give up on it. So folks, with that dramatic note, we are wrapping up another episode of Marios History Talks. Glad you stayed around till the end. I really do hope you watch this, you share it with family and friends. A lot to digest there, and I understand that, but very important conversation to have. Again, I want to thank everybody for all the help and all the support and ultimately trusting the plan. You have not abandoned me. I know it must have been difficult at times, but I really do appreciate that. I'll get to work on another episode of Marios History Talks. At this time, we're doing 2 a month, so bear with me. But shoot me a line if you have any kind of questions. Drop me a line on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. I'll try to get to it as quickly as possible. In the meantime, fight for Macedonia in any way you know possible. Stay safe, keep fighting for her, and I'll see you again soon. Until next time, pozdrav.